This story takes place 27 years after the First Corporate War. The Nest by Sean Carrière. Chapter 19. By the time the sun was low enough to hover over the distant rain clouds, the team had a near-perfect ambush set up. 3 buildings down from the bank was a hardware store with a big colorful sign above its front doors that read, "Renovators and Decorators Outlet." Sam had gone in and raided their nail bins for shrapnel. With 4 buckets, ceramic plates from spare flak vests, thousands of nails and over a pound of plastic explosive, Sam had built 4 road bombs. These IEDs were similar in concept to claymores, but angled to take out vehicles' tires. The road bombs were set up against the sidewalk on the same side of the street the bank was on, 1 bomb every 6 meters. When the young revolutionaries would drive up the road later to get a closer look at their leader's crashed ride, Sam would hit the red button on his remote detonator and blast thousands of carpenter's nails into the passenger side tires of at least 8 vehicles. As for Kyle, he'd kept himself busy by setting up multiple firing positions at the windows along the top floors of the first 3 buildings down from the bank. The team's leader had gathered dozens of cardboard boxes stuffed with papers from the top floor of the bank and then stacked them like sandbags waist-high at each of his firing positions. These fort-like stacks of boxes overfilled with documents would provide a little extra cover for the firefight that was bound to happen. Kyle had even raided hundreds of books from the private library of a lawyer's office 2 buildings down from the bank. These were laid like tiles along the floor at each firing spot. Again, Kyle hoped these would help stop any bullets the young revolutionaries were going to fire at him and Sam later. Meanwhile, Sam still had plenty of party favors left in the form of frag grenades, and he used them to set dozens of booby traps along the ground floors and stairwells of the first 3 buildings down from the bank. This would prevent any young revolutionaries from flanking Kyle and Sam. Kyle had ordered his breacher not to arm these booby traps just yet. They'd wait until the whole ambush was set up before hooking tripwires to the pins of these cleverly hidden grenades. Kyle obviously didn't want to risk anyone on his team tripping a booby trap meant for a young revolutionary. The plan was simple, but brilliant. When the young revolutionaries would drive up the narrow road, Sam would set off his road bombs and disable the terrorists' vehicles, trapping them within the kill zone. As soon as the young revolutionaries would exit their vehicles, Slick would shoot at them from his firing position atop of the bank. This would get the terrorists' attention and draw their fire. Kyle and Sam would then complete an L ambush and shoot down at the terrorists from their own firing positions along the top floors of the neighboring buildings. Using the rooftops, Kyle and Sam would then move from building to building back to the bank, while keeping the young revolutionaries pinned down long enough for Laura and Bench Press to load their prisoners into the van. Once back on top of the bank, Kyle and Sam would rejoin Slick, and all 3 would fast rope down into the farmer's market. From there, the team would drive back over to the parallel street they'd originally approached on, and use it to get around the stranded terrorists. Kyle wasn't the least bit worried about the young revolutionaries blocking the intersection before the River Parkway. When Laura bought her truck, she had the frame and front end reinforced before mounting a steel cow catcher where the factory bumper was meant to be. Combine this with the supercharged big block under the hood, and the old girl's truck resembled the bastard lovechild of a freight train and a medieval battering ram.
If the young revolutionaries try blocking that intersection,
Kyle thought to himself,
they'd better use something big, like a bulldozer.
Kyle was tired, damn near exhausted, but he was proud of his team for how well they'd used the last couple of hours. With a solid plan and a lot of elbow grease, they'd taken a bad situation and turned it to their advantage, lemons to lemonade. Kyle thought back to his time in boot camp and how his drill sergeant liked to say,
The Chinese use the same word for crisis as they use for opportunity.
Kyle had learned very quickly that drill sergeants have no sense of haha after asking if that was in Mandarin or Cantonese. The answer he'd received was to be put on latrine digging duty for a month. The only thing missing to make the plan work was some kind of bridge connecting the bank's roof to the roof of the closest neighboring building. There was a 10-meter gap between the two edifices, and the 4-story drop was a bit of an obstacle. That's when Kyle remembered the long cash counter inside the bank. It was made of a solid piece of hardwood, and it was certainly long enough to bridge the gap.
Bench press. Meet me inside the bank.
Kyle said into his suit's radio. 5 minutes later, Kyle walked into the bank, met up with the team's medic, and explained his idea of using the countertop as a bridge to the roof of the building next door. Bench press had already brought the team's gear inside hours earlier. He grabbed a crowbar from the tool chest usually kept in the bed of Laura's truck and approached the cash counter. Bench press began using the crowbar to loosen the cash counter from its base. At first, Kyle doubted they could separate the two, and he began considering other means to bridge the gap between the buildings. Perhaps a rope system. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, something between a low crack and several sharp squeaks. This was the sound of nails over a century-old coming loose from dense wood. With a little leverage from the crowbar, and good old-fashioned muscle, bench press had an entire section of the countertop loose of its base. After hearing the stubborn old nails giving way, or simply breaking, bench press let the massive piece of lumber come back down while making sure to keep the long crowbar wedged in good and tight. Bench press then crouched as he positioned himself with his shoulder underneath the crowbar. After a few seconds to psych himself up, bench press squat lifted the entire front part of the decimeter-thick, 12-meter-long plank of hardwood free from the counter's thick wooden frame. The team's medic held the heavy chunk of timber up for several seconds before lowering it back down nice and gentle onto its sturdy base. Kyle could hear bench press catching his breath over their suits' radios.
You okay, bench press?
Kyle asked. Bench press waved a hand dismissingly.
Don't fret over me, boss. That wasn't even close to my personal best.
Bench press then walked around to the other side of the counter, and began repeating the process over again. The bank's countertop must have weighed several hundred pounds, and Kyle still had to figure out a way to get it up on the roof. The young bounty hunter walked over to the neat piles of gear, and began rummaging through the same tool chest bench press had grabbed the crowbar from. Kyle soon found exactly what he needed: hand-powered crank winches. He grabbed 2 winches from the tool chest before grabbing some coiled rope. That's when the young bounty hunter noticed Danny Blue was staring at him from across the room. The young bounty hunter wanted to say something. Hell, he wanted to do more than just say something. But he had too much to deal with at the moment. Instead, Kyle just slung the coiled rope over his shoulder and walked back to the cash counter. Meanwhile, Laura stood a few meters away from the 2 prisoners. The wheelwoman had missed the silent exchange between Kyle and Danny Blue as she busied herself with running their escape route out of the C-zone over and over again in her mind. Laura carefully visualized the satellite images she and Kyle had looked at earlier, and she committed them to memory. Little did the team's driver realize, Danny Blue was busy planning his own getaway.
Fuck these idiots.
Danny Blue thought to himself.
Let the rats feast on them.